The worlds of two-dimensional and three-dimensional games are vastly different from one another. And are, to a certain extent, justifyingly treated as such. Resulting in the endless and tiresome 2D versus 3D argument that has reached console war levels of obnoxious at this point in time. I personally think this continuous battle is about as dumb as it is pointless. One isn't necessarily better than the other. They are completely different beasts with their own strong and weak points. Rather than a division and rivalry, their differences should be embraced and appreciated in their own lane. I truly mourn the emphasis on their differences and how most games stay within one of their lanes, because if applied carefully, 2D and 3D blend together really well. From the small 2D sections in Super Mario Odyssey to games like Octopath Traveler and Xenogears using 2D characters in 3D environments, combining the two has been proven to work exceptionally well. But despite the existing and ambitious crossovers, seldom has a game dared to experiment with designing its entire adventure around this very crossover. An adventure where you constantly switch between 2D and 3D. Anno Mutationem is the embodiment of said experience. Set in a cyberpunk-like world, Anno Mutationem revolves around Anne Flores. Anne has quite the crazy life in her hometown of Scop City, as she's not just a private detective, but also a full-time fighting machine and a part-time bartender.
You can do it! Try again, sis.
On top of being a daughter of a robot and best friends with a hologram, of course. As exciting as Anne's life must be, there's a lot more brewing in this world than she ever could have bargained for. Over the years, more and more citizens have been infected with the Mechanica virus, a virus that slowly but surely takes over the human body and turns them into these robot-like zombies without any thoughts or feelings. While the world in its current state is recovering from this viral outbreak, its effects still linger in the inner depths of every area. Anne, however, isn't so much recovering, and she's dealing with a raw mechanized disease called etangelitis. This particular disease causes her to fully black out and go berserk at times, destroying anyone or anything standing in her way. Even her adoptive brother Ryan. Information on this strange disease is not forthcoming, and thus finding a cure is like finding a needle in a haystack. Despite the Anne-inflicted injury, Ryan is absolutely determined to help Anne find a cure. What starts off as a completely normal day for Anne quickly deteriorates into an absolute nightmare, as she finds out Ryan has gone missing in search for a cure for her disease. It appears Ryan has gotten himself into trouble with a big criminal organization, setting off the story as Anne and her hologram partner and best friend Ayane in turn go on a mission to find and rescue him. As the duo unravels the trail Ryan left behind on his ambitious search for a cure, they quickly find themselves entangled into much more than a simple rescue mission. They discover much bigger problems, threats and conspiracies that pose a threat to the very fabric of reality itself, if not dealt with as soon as fucking possible. And that's pretty much the story. Or well, the gist of it. The story is rather complicated, with the game guiding you through Mechanica virus-related subplots in the sewers of Freeway 42, parallel flashback dimensions only Anne can access, and
I'm Santa, the bringer of joy to children.
Bullcrap. If you're Santa, I'm Jesus. Who are you?
I'm Santa Claus.
The game never really loses the common thread of the story, but at times it gets a little too overexcited for its own good. The game's a bit over-eager in hurling new characters, story turns, subplots and or world-altering revelations at the player itself. Some of which are actually answered, but many remain their own little mysteries, making it pretty fucking difficult to write this part of the script. Whereas every review I've read took issue with this, I kinda got excited over this, if I'm brutally honest. Not only does it show the developers having too many ideas to count, but I was caught off guard continuously, not knowing what to expect around the next corner. The story's unpolished, rather difficult to follow, and doesn't really know what it wants to be at times, but being as unpredictable as it is, it kept me on the edge of my seat at all times, turning a supposed shortcoming into something that kept me playing. It's a bit of a mess that stems from the developers having too many fun-ass ideas, but it's a crazy exciting mess at that. Not to mention, a good chunk of it is voice acted as well. Though about half of the game's story happens through clicking through text boxes, the other half takes place through these insanely animated cutscenes with dank ass camera angles, visuals and anything other as effects, in addition to some decent ass voice acting from the game's most prominent characters, making a crazy exciting mess. All the more crazy and exciting.
Hello? Testing. I'm Ryan Flores. If anyone finds this recording, please give it to my sister. Her name is Anne. Anne Flores. The whole situation is more complex than I had thought, but I won't give up. I'm going to keep searching for N540 to help my sister. Based on what the Prophet told me, this place is more dangerous than I thought, but I had to check it out in person.
The voice acting isn't Ray Liotta from Goodfellas voicing Tommy Vercetti type professional,
Lord assholes!
but it's mostly pretty damn solid, giving a lot of character to the actual characters. The overly hyped, somewhat horny lesbian sidekick Ayane, the I pretend to be cool but I'm actually fucking losing it guy called C,
Thank you for your kind reminder. Though I suggest you mind your own business, G.
the imaginary girl guiding Anne through the mysteries of the world,
Your eyes are quite fascinating. Like a pair of azure gems.
Monkey. The voice acting truly adds a whole lot to painting the story and its characters, as confusing as some of it might be at times. I truly became a fan of most, if not all of them. And with that, the narrative for the adventure is set. An adventure that truly writes itself. Yeah, the story's a bit of a mess, but never do you find yourself wondering where to go or what you're looking for. There's always a very clear waypoint on the minimap and even mission logs and a bigger map available in the main menu if you so desire. And that's what the game really boils down to. Reach the waypoint, clear out the area, and move on to the next. Well, it's not quite as clear-cut as that, but for the narrative, let's pretend it is. Anno Mutationem is an action-adventure game, and thus clearing out whatever area handles the formula of explore, fight, and overcome. But more importantly, uses RPG elements to do so. Yeah, I know, I'm drooling over skill trees and upgrades again. Let me have my moment, okay? Upgradables like these give me the dopamine boosts I so desperately need. On first glance, the combat looks like a standard hack and slash. But Anne is quite a multifaceted woman, and thus has a few tricks up her sleeve. Aside from a dodge roll, a jump, and the ability to block incoming attacks, with the press of a simple button, Anne's able to wield a gun, a lightweight or a heavyweight weapon, with some D-pad controlled grenades, health items, or temporary stat boost potions to aid her as well. Anne and her slick weaponry are then run through the RPG mill to truly make me a happy fucking individual. There are weapons to purchase or obtain from quests, attachments for said weapons in the form of chips to craft or purchase, and the fleshed out skill tree to spend experience points on in true RPG fashion. The weapons have varying attacks, armor piercing, handle speed, and they even have elemental specialties that do more damage based on enemy type. And then there's the chip attachments to add even more detail to an already fun dig measuring contest by adding additional stat or elemental boosts to whatever weapon they're smacked onto. The typings then in turn can be found in these funky little enemy Pokédex entries that will give you a brief description of what they are and what type they belong to. Shit's pretty cool. The elemental aspect of things is something that never really reaches its full potential, as consciously switching between weapons for their additional elemental effects is too much of a hassle, and there are no real visual cues telling you what type an enemy is outside of their Pokédex entries. But the additional damage bonus you'll never be aware of is kinda welcome regardless, even if I ended up selling elemental chips to buy general attack damage chips instead. Comparing stats and grinding your way towards better equipment is about as fun and rewarding as can be. Not to mention incentivizing scanning every nook and cranny of every main and optional area, as the chips and weapons don't just need materials to be crafted or upgraded for, i.e. more chip slots, but obviously need to be paid for as well. Lesson number 1. Nothing in life is free. I had such a fun time opening up trash cans and random cabinets to obtain items to recycle for materials or junk to sell for a quick buck. There are even a bunch of items and materials you can use pretty much instantly, as opening chests and cabinets doesn't just reward you with potions or grenades, but also with materials for said potions and grenades, that can then be crafted on the spot by pressing down on the D-pad. Using the rest of the materials, you then grind towards buying a better weapon, after which you can grind for stat boosting chips, after which you can grind for additional slots for said chips, after which you can combine said chips for an even better chip, that can then be combined with other crafted from smaller chips, bigger chips. The grind never stops, and I enjoy the ever-living hell out of it. There's even this part of the chip shop that will make you burn 500 of your well-earned money to turn a certain chip into another completely randomized chip. Shit's nothing more than a gamble and an excellent scam, but exciting due to its unpredictability nonetheless. The grind truly never stops, as the equipment grind provides you with better tools to grind. Using the tools you worked your ass off for will enable you to plant the seeds for the game's fun as fuck skill tree. Mowing down normie enemies will reward you with normie experience in the form of grumbits to be spent on the top half of the skill tree, with the bottom half being unlocked with the cool guy experience, aka grum upgrades, that only drops from bosses. The bottom half consists of the more static attack, defense and drop rate bonuses, while the top half will provide you with new moves for the different types of weapons and upgrading the rewards of the game's scarcely used hacking feature, in which you have to spin these circles forever to have them line up, or enter the right symbol code that can be found somewhere in the area, all to unlock a door or a computer. Now, and this might be a mind-blowing revelation. A skill tree is a skill tree, and thus there isn't a whole lot to digest or go in depth about, but in the grander scheme of things, I can only praise the thing down to its very roots. All of these funky tools and stats to grind towards truly mesh together to make for a hugely enjoyable combat system that I didn't get bored of throughout my entire playthrough. And it's easy to control, and her rapid strikes that are incredibly responsive to your button inputs are very satisfying to pull off. The quick switching between the different weapons and or items is flawless as well, as it takes a mere second for Anne to pull out her humongous blade to hit those pesky enemies as hard as she can. The game incentivizes you to switch between the 3 available weapons as well, as airborne enemies can only be hit by your gun, and heavily armored enemies are much more suited to be tackled with the twice as armor penetrating big sword than her lightweight weapon. Hell, even the lightweight weapons themselves provide you with multiple options, as you can choose to use the basic bitch sword or dual wield like a true gamer. The game then proceeds to give you different skill tree branches to unlock moves for the big blade, the single wield blade and the lightweight double wield blade as well, which are both as fancy looking as useful as well, if you're skilled enough to care and remember those types of combos, that is. I am a bit of a fucking idiot, and I always end up mashing random buttons in any hack and slash, because I can simply not be bothered to remember specific combos like that. But that didn't stop the combat from being hella exciting. Dodging all the enemy attacks and dwindling all their armor down was hella engaging. Not to mention the finishing move that unlocks for a brief period of time upon destroying all their armor, being the most satisfying feeling. Then Anne even unlocks this Avatar Trance mode for story-related reasons that makes her invincible for a brief period of time, and then has to be regenerated by killing enemies. Shit's neat and feels like an extra berserk mode for slaying as many baddies as you can. The way these rewards are presented is what deserves the highest amount of praise out of anything combat related. The game was clearly designed to never make the player overpowered, and it achieved just that. There's only a select amount of enemies in every dungeon that cannot be rebattled for additional experience, and with only story bosses providing you the experience to upgrade your base stats, you'll always grow in strength on par with the enemies you're facing. There's never a situation where you have too much attack, defense or health and whatnot to feel like it's a total stump, preventing the combat from becoming a chore. Newer, tougher enemies with bigger health bars and deadlier perks are introduced at what feels like the perfect time, and expand the playing field at a perfect pace. At first there are only simple blade wielders and underqualified gunmen, but before you know it, you find yourself surrounded by giga-ched heavy hitters, pyromaniacs, and this wolf-looking guy that's a little too trigger-happy with his remote-controlled explosives. With all of it culminating into extraordinarily well-designed boss fights against one of Ben 10's transformations, or the frowny face machine of destruction. Every fight feels clean, diverse, satisfying, and above all, fun as fuck throughout the entire game. And controls well and has a solid arsenal of tools and moves to use in combat, with the enemies being just as diverse and never being a slouch to fight against, all while expanding at the perfect pace on both sides of the battle. The combat never becomes more difficult than having to use a handful of health packs in a fight that are then refilled rather quickly, but I'm way past enjoying Dark Souls-like difficulties regardless. Which, by the way, is still an option in the game's New Game Plus function anyway. The combat is enjoyable, but is nothing more than an add-on to why I purchased the game in the first place. The game is without a doubt one of the, if not the, most gorgeous pixel art game I have ever played. And while that was enough to reel me in from the very first trailer, I was quick to find out the world building of the environments and cityscapes are a true work of art. Every single inch of every single area seems to have a purpose, as if everything down to the smallest breadcrumb was handcrafted and intentional. The forefronts of the big cities and small towns you'll pass through are all drenched in the classic cyberpunk style. Flashy billboards, decorative lighting, bright shop, club and hotel signs, floating neon clocks, you name it, all oozing with bright and bustling color schemes. But Anno Mutationem stands for so much more than a simple cyberpunk aesthetic. Exploring a little further will then lead you to the grim and somber slums and back alleys that shows you the other side of the big city. A much darker color palette, much more ominous lighting, shady as fuck characters. Shit's literally night and day. And then there's the dungeons that boldly switch up the aesthetics and vibes even more to make them all the more memorable. Deserted areas, underground sewers, big-ass freight ships. Every single one of these areas breathes a different aesthetic, making for a plethora of visual variety that is incredibly satisfying to play through. The choice of color palettes and lighting in every area are the closest one can get to perfection, perfectly capturing the feeling one would have in said area. However, this feeling is all but caused solely by some colors and lampposts. The biggest compliment I can give this game is how real and plausible it feels. Rarely have I ever in a video game felt like a true resident of its world, like I'm allowed to peek into a world that existed long before Anne. Long before the video game was even in development. The sense of immersion in this game is without a doubt its greatest feature. no matter where Anne sets foot on, shit feels hella lively. Or not lively at all. The world of Anno Mutationem captures different themes, environments, and atmospheres of the everyday world pretty fucking well. There's the busy nightlife of Noctis City, with all of these drenched in neon light billboards, shop signs, and other figures advertising some bullshit nobody ever wants or needs, and the shady people of the night hanging around in every corner of the city. To then head back to Scop City for the day, that just screams work, money, and economy, with all of its shops, restaurants, and people in suits walking down the street. Then there's the calm town of Margarita, where people are winding down inside their residences, or hanging out in and outside of the popular bar after a busy day of work. Harbor Town is probably my favorite of the bunch, as it represents the underground criminal circuit of the world. There's thugs hanging around everywhere, tough-ass boxing matches being hosted, illegal materials being sold, with the town itself being nothing more than a floating platform, shrouded in ominous darkness. And then, at the bottom of society, we have the deserted Freeway 42, with its overgrown tank stations and residential buildings, all showing signs of what this place was like in the past. All that's left are the Mechanica virus-infected people, sitting around a campfire as the Mechanica virus takes over their brain and body. The world and its different areas encapsulate the different layers of society and the lives of people incredibly well. All of that is just what you notice on your first couple of visits to these areas. Every time you pass through any of them, you'll discover something new. Little cans, paper sheets, trash bags, and anything that qualifies as litter on the streets, posters on the building's walls, reflections of the puddles of rainwater on the ground. My favorite thing of all of this is how there are hundreds of different looking NPCs, all carefully crafted in a pixel art style that blends in effortlessly with the 3D backgrounds and environments. They all have their own handcrafted cool looking facial expressions that must have taken a shit ton of work. Ayane on her own has more animations than the entire cast of some games has combined. Shit just turns the whole thing into a piece of eye candy. You slowly but surely peel off layer after layer of the imaginary ball of thought put into the game's presentation. Walking through these areas surely is something that never gets old. But these visuals would be worth a lot less if it wasn't for the ability to interact with almost all of it. The NPCs, random posters on the wall, and tablets on the floor aren't just to fill up some empty space. Everyone and everything has something to them. There are posters on the wall for the player to interact with to get a little insight of who or what is relevant in Anno's world, statues to inspect and learn about, sheets of paper to find and read that serve the purpose of describing anything as simple as a grocery list to vague clues about some horrific event. Digital devices scattered around in lab sections of the game to read about the experiments and issues with the Mechanica virus and plot spoiler related stuff. And then there's of course the trash bags, chests, cabinets and cans that contain some material to sell or recycle for weapons and or chips, that also all have unique descriptions by the way. You even have these random arcade machines where you can play Pong. And lose. And then I haven't even mentioned all the NPCs hanging around in any area. that have actual dialogue relevant to their temporary or overall situation. They're shady characters in back alleys trying to sell you some shady shit, people discussing their recent criminal activities, or straight up being depressed as hell. Some of the characters even function as more than just some dialogue to read, as some of them will actually have a conversation with Anne, including tons of unique, cool-looking animations, and even better, give you something to do. Anne's adoptive older sister will give you a bartending minigame, where you make and serve customers cocktails for a quick buck. Then there's this corn guy that will randomly organize a street fighting tournament with a fun little reward, and you even got some guy hiding in the sewers that will hand you a collectible in exchange for some food. On top of that, there are also some actual side quests, where you solve a murder mystery in Anne's apartment building, or find out who's the face behind an AI singer, all containing visuals that go way too hard for a simple side quest. Incredibly cool looking flashbacks, excellent camera movement, visual effects and animations, rooms that are detailed to the last breadcrumb that the player will look at once to find a code to a room for a side quest, and then never visit again. There's just so much to see, read and do in this world, which makes exploring all of it a genuine joy. And then there's the transitions between 2D and 3D that mostly happens inside of the game's dungeons. Anno Mutationem is an action-adventure game, where the action, aka fighting the baddies, happens from a 2D perspective, and the adventure, aka exploration, happens from a 3D perspective, with the two perspectives alternating seamlessly from area to area. The 2D fighting sections are fast-paced and jam-packed with action, with the 3D exploration section serving the purpose of scavenging resources to aid the player with said action. The 2D sections have Anne being able to run at full speed, perform swift double jumps and pull out her gun, blade and grenades with the click of a button. The 3D exploration sections are the polar opposites. Not only is Anne's speed notably lowered to a trot, but none of the combat options are available. Hell, she can't even jump at all. While the continuous switch between these significantly different types of gameplay could become a nuisance, I'm specifically highlighting this exact thing because it's one of the game's strengths to me. Not only do the 2D and 3D perspectives alternate seamlessly, so do these different styles of gameplay. The slower, limited gameplay of the exploration allows you to soak in the environments and collect whatever's available, rather than blasting your way through it. And stiff walking animation is perfect for a game like this. Glancing at the cool looking environments, uncovering the truth of the evil shit that's been happening behind the scenes of this world via tablets and computers, talking to i.e. virus infected people in the sewers or dead scientists. Shit's dope and entertaining as hell. Walking around the corner in some of the deepest, dangerous hellholes of the world and seeing the fucking corn guy just standing there selling his corn juice, it cracked me up every time. Then you do something as simple as walk through a door, the camera zooms out, more tense music starts playing, and boom, you're ready to rumble. Just you versus the world. No slow pacing or anything to read or look at inside, aside from the excellent backgrounds resembling the areas you're fighting in and or ran through just a second ago on a different floor of the building. Shit's clean as hell. and switching between the perspectives and gameplay styles made the areas and the game as a whole much more memorable to me altogether. Memorable. That's the best word to describe this game. A memorable, crazy, weird rollercoaster of a story, memorable combat, skill trees and equipment grinds, and a more than memorable alive world that blends its 2D and 3D aspects perfectly. This is truly some of the best world building I've ever got to experience in a video game. However, memorable does not in fact mean perfect. The game most certainly has some good old jank to it. It's got a handful of tiny little issues like Anne's slow-paced running animation looking a tad bit too stiff, Anne's outfit in the animated cutscenes not corresponding with one of the 6 available outfits I made her pick from her bedroom closet, cutscenes where the voice acting doesn't correspond with the subtitles for like 10 to 15% of the time either due to translation errors or straight up contains spelling mistakes, by the way. But even on a grander scale of things, memorable doesn't mean perfect. The combat is fun and enjoyable, but most certainly not the most engaging or technically advanced combat I have ever experienced. Not to mention switching to Anne's invincibility mode by pressing RT and LT at the same time and not working half the time, repeatedly pulling up her shield instead, until she finally understood what I meant to do. At some point you also get to fight as a machine by using Ayane's hacking powers, which was a lot of fun, but then never expanded upon, making it feel like a random idea they just threw in there at the end to never be repeated again. And then there's of course the story, which I have already admitted to being a crazy mess. The story's a bit of a loose projectile, throwing new characters, story turns, and subplots at the player left, right and center, all for it to build up to this guy with a hand going apeshit, and the actual ape being a scientist in a lab coat. Shit's all but a logical and satisfying ending to a game. But the reason I lumped all of this together at the closing section of the video is because I don't fucking care. The game's hella fun, enjoyable, and absolutely gorgeous to the smallest of details. These issues are present and notable at that, but mentioning these when talking about anything would just take away from how much this game is actually worth playing. The game's all but perfect, and there's quite a bit to improve on if they were to make a sequel, but I found these issues to not hinder the gameplay in the slightest. Anno Mutationem is a game with a crazy exciting clusterfuck of a storyline, enacted by cool, unique and memorable characters, played through solid controls, a fun combat system and an equipment grind that remains satisfying from start to finish, all built into and around an interactive, gorgeous world, unlike I have ever seen before in a video game. And you get all that for just $21, when it is easily worth double the price. If only for inventing the lizard type rap beat. Ah. Yeah. Ah. Yeah. I'm going in. No, I'm just kidding.